In the blink of an eye, everything changes. Not slowly, not gradually, but instantly. The world continues breathing, clocks keep ticking, cities remain loud, yet something eternal interrupts the ordinary. Scripture speaks of a moment when mortality puts on immortality, not as an escape from the world, but as a fulfillment of a promise spoken long before time began. The idea of glorified bodies is not symbolic poetry, it is a declaration of transformation, a change so complete that weakness no longer defines existence, pain no longer writes the story of the flesh, and decay loses its authority. The Bible describes bodies raised in power, not bound by limitation, bodies untouched by disease, exhaustion, or fear, not fragile like before, not temporary like before. This is not about becoming something unfamiliar. It is about becoming what humanity was always meant to be, restored, renewed, perfected in alignment with God's design. When Scripture says we shall be changed in the twinkling of an eye, it points to a transformation beyond human effort. No preparation of the body can achieve it. No discipline or strength can produce it. It is God Himself who completes the work He began, turning what was perishable into something eternal, turning dust into glory. The glorified body is not merely brighter or stronger, it reflects obedience fulfilled, faith rewarded, hope realized. These bodies move without exhaustion, see without distortion, exist without decay, and yet remain fully aware, fully alive, fully present. The resurrection of Jesus stands as the pattern, a body that passed through barriers, yet could still be recognized, a body that bore the marks of sacrifice, yet carried no pain. This is the promise extended to believers, not as fantasy, but as destiny. The rapture is not about disappearance, it is about transformation, a moment when heaven intersects the physical world and the limitations of flesh are replaced with divine design. Those who are alive are changed, those who have died are raised, not to wander, but to stand complete, restored, and whole. This is not fear-driven teaching, it is hope-centered truth, a reminder that the present form of life is not the final chapter. Every ache, every scar, every weakness tells a temporary story, but glorification tells the eternal one. The promise does not erase identity, it perfects it. You do not lose who you are, you become who you were meant to be. The glorified body is not bound by gravity or decay, yet it is grounded in purpose, created to dwell in God's presence without separation. This transformation does not begin in the clouds, it begins in the heart. A life aligned with God slowly prepares for a moment that arrives suddenly. The rapture is not random, it is precise, not chaotic, but ordered. Scripture does not describe confusion, it describes fulfillment, not terror, but completion. The moment is described as sudden, but never unplanned. For those watching, waiting, and walking in faith, this change is not loss, it is arrival. The glorified body does not replace obedience, it confirms it. It does not cancel faith, it completes it. Every promise spoken finds its answer here. Every prayer whispered finds its echo here. Every act of faithfulness finds its meaning here. And the transformation itself speaks without words, declaring that death no longer rules, time no longer controls, and corruption no longer defines existence. This is not the end of the story, it is the unveiling of what was always written beneath the surface, a reality unfolding exactly as promised, exactly as intended, exactly as prepared. And as Scripture continues to unfold this mystery, it invites reflection not on the timing, but on the readiness of the heart, the posture of faith, and the quiet confidence that what God promised, He is fully able to complete.
What makes this promise even more profound is that Scripture never presents glorification as distant mythology. It is woven into everyday faith, into how believers live, endure, and hope. The idea of glorified bodies reshapes how suffering is understood. Pain is not ignored, loss is not minimized, but neither is it permanent. Paul speaks of present affliction as momentary, not because it feels small, but because eternity redefines its weight. The glorified body becomes the answer to questions the soul has always asked. Why does the body fail? Why does time leave its mark? Why does strength fade? God does not dismiss these questions. He answers them with transformation. The body sown in weakness is raised in power. The body sown in dishonor is raised in glory, not replaced, but renewed. This renewal does not erase the journey. It honors it. Every trial becomes part of the testimony. Every act of perseverance becomes part of the reward. Every quiet moment of faithfulness is remembered. The rapture reveals that God is not abandoning creation. He is reclaiming it, restoring it to its intended order. Heaven is not foreign territory for the glorified body. It is the environment it was designed for. This explains why Scripture describes longing, a deep groaning within creation itself, waiting for the revealing of what has been hidden. The transformation is not rushed, yet when it comes, it is instant, a paradox only God could design. One moment bound by limitation, the next free from it. The glorified body reflects a life no longer divided, no conflict between spirit and flesh, no struggle between desire and obedience. What was once difficult becomes natural. What was once resisted becomes joy. This is why readiness is emphasized more than prediction. The focus is never on dates, but on devotion, living in a way that aligns the present with the promised future, not out of fear, but anticipation. The rapture does not interrupt God's plan, it reveals it. It shows that history is moving with intention, that faith is not misplaced, and that hope is not naive. The glorified body stands as proof that redemption is complete, spirit, soul, and body brought into harmony. No more separation, no more decay, no more waiting. Yet even now, the promise shapes behavior. How believers treat the body, how they value obedience, how they respond to suffering. Because what is destined for glory is treated with purpose, not neglect, not despair. The rapture is not an escape from responsibility. It is the fulfillment of faith lived out daily. And as Scripture continues to unfold this mystery, it quietly shifts attention from speculation to transformation, from curiosity to conviction, from fear to confidence. The glorified body is not just something believers will receive, it is something they are being prepared for, day by day, moment by moment, as the promise remains steady, unchanging, unbroken, waiting to be revealed exactly as written, exactly as intended, exactly as God has declared.
This preparation is often invisible, not marked by dramatic signs, but by quiet alignment. Scripture consistently points inward before it points upward, to the heart before the heavens. The promise of glorification shapes character long before it changes form. It teaches patience in a hurried world, faithfulness in an uncertain one. Believers are not called to wait passively, but to live deliberately, aware that every choice echoes beyond the present moment. The rapture is sudden, but readiness is cultivated over time. This is why Scripture speaks so often about perseverance, about running the race, about finishing well. The glorified body is not a reward detached from relationship. It is the natural outcome of belonging. To belong to Christ is to share in His victory, not only spiritually, but completely. The transformation mirrors His resurrection, a body that could be touched, yet not restrained, recognizable, yet radiant. This continuity brings comfort. Nothing meaningful is lost, nothing faithful is forgotten. Identity is not erased in glory, it is clarified. The fears that once clouded purpose fall away. The doubts that once challenged belief lose their grip. What remains is clarity, unity, peace. The rapture does not diminish the value of earthly life, it magnifies it. It reveals that every act of love, every moment of obedience, every quiet prayer carries eternal weight. Time itself becomes meaningful, not as something slipping away, but as something being fulfilled. The glorified body stands as evidence that God finishes what he begins, that salvation is not partial, and redemption is not symbolic. The body, once subject to decay, becomes a vessel of honor, not through human effort, but divine promise. This promise reshapes perspective. Suffering is endured with hope. Joy is embraced with gratitude. The future is not feared because it is known, not in detail, but in certainty. Scripture does not invite obsession with the moment of transformation. It invites trust in the one who transforms, and that trust deepens daily as faith matures, as understanding grows. The rapture remains ahead, certain yet unseen, but its influence is already at work, shaping hearts, refining motives, strengthening resolve. As believers walk forward, carrying both promise and purpose, living between what has been accomplished and what is yet to be revealed, with confidence grounded not in speculation, but in the unchanging faithfulness of God, who continues to prepare, to refine, to call, and to draw his people steadily toward the moment when what is hidden will finally be revealed.
That revelation does not arrive in chaos, but in perfect order. God's timeline has never been rushed, never delayed, never confused. Every promise unfolds with precision, even when human understanding struggles to keep pace. The rapture fits within that divine consistency, not as an interruption, but as a fulfillment. From Genesis to Revelation, the pattern remains steady. God rescues before judgment. He preserves before destruction. Just as Noah was lifted above the flood, just as Lot was removed before fire fell, the principle of divine protection echoes through history. This pattern does not weaken faith, it strengthens it because it reveals a God who knows how to separate without abandoning, who saves without forgetting justice. The glorified body stands at the center of this hope, a testimony that salvation reaches its full expression. Mortality does not have the final word. Pain does not define the future. Weakness does not determine destiny. What rises is not fragile, not temporary, not bound by decay. Scripture describes it with language that stretches imagination, imperishable, powerful, filled with glory, yet still personal, still known, still connected to the story God has been writing all along. This continuity reassures the heart that eternity is not foreign, it is familiar, perfected. Faith, then, becomes more than belief. It becomes anticipation, not anxious waiting, but confident expectation. Believers live with eyes open, aware of the world's brokenness, yet anchored in promise. Every generation has wondered if they would witness this moment. Every generation has felt the tension between now and not yet. That tension is intentional. It keeps the heart alert, the spirit engaged. Scripture repeatedly calls believers to remain watchful, not out of fear, but readiness. Watchfulness shapes priorities. It simplifies what truly matters. Love becomes central. Faith becomes active. Hope becomes steady. The glorified body is not an escape from responsibility. It is a confirmation that faithfulness matters, that unseen obedience is seen, that silent endurance is remembered. The rapture does not negate suffering, it gives it context. Trials are not meaningless delays, they are part of refinement. Gold is tested before it shines, faith is proven before it is rewarded. This understanding shifts how life is lived. Moments are no longer wasted, challenges are no longer pointless. Each step forward carries eternal significance. The promise continues to whisper through Scripture, not loudly, but persistently, reminding believers that what is coming will not disappoint, will not fail, will not fade. And as this hope deepens, it begins to reshape identity itself, no longer defined by what is temporary, but by what is eternal, no longer driven by fear of loss, but by confidence in restoration. The rapture remains ahead, certain, unannounced, its reality pressing gently into daily life, guiding decisions, shaping faith, strengthening resolve. As believers continue forward, living within this sacred tension, trusting the same God who promised transformation is still actively preparing his people for what lies just beyond what can be seen.
That unseen preparation is not distant or passive. It is active, intentional, and deeply personal. God is not merely planning an event. He is shaping a people. Every day lived in faith adds another layer, another refinement, another quiet alignment with eternity. The promise of glorified bodies speaks softly into the present, reminding believers that what feels heavy now will not remain heavy forever. Weakness does not define the final form. Aging does not dictate the outcome. Brokenness does not get the last word. Scripture's language becomes more vivid here. Transformation, renewal, completion, not as abstract ideas, but as realities waiting to unfold. The body that rises is described as incorruptible, not subject to decay or decline, no longer vulnerable to pain or limitation. Yet it is not unfamiliar, not unrecognizable, not disconnected from identity. Continuity remains, but perfected. Just as Christ's resurrected body was real, tangible, and glorious, so too is the promise extended to believers. This truth reframes suffering. It does not minimize it, but it prevents it from becoming ultimate. Pain becomes temporary. Hope becomes permanent. The rapture, then, is not merely a moment of departure. It is a moment of completion, a culmination of promises spoken over centuries, a fulfillment long anticipated. Faith matures as this understanding deepens, moving beyond surface belief into settled assurance. Believers learn to hold life lightly, not in detachment, but in trust. Daily responsibilities still matter, relationships still carry weight, love still demands effort, yet all of it exists within a larger story, one that does not end in loss, but in restoration. Watchfulness becomes a posture of the heart, not a constant anxiety, but a steady awareness. Eyes remain open to the signs of the times, while hearts remain grounded in truth. Scripture does not encourage speculation, it encourages readiness. Readiness expressed through faithfulness, through perseverance, through unwavering trust. The promise of transformation motivates holiness, not perfectionism, but sincere pursuit. Lives begin to reflect eternal values. Compassion deepens, forgiveness expands, hope stabilizes. The glorified body stands as proof that God finishes what he starts. Nothing is abandoned halfway. Nothing is left incomplete. What begins in grace moves steadily toward glory. This forward movement continues quietly, often unnoticed, yet always advancing. The world moves forward unaware, but faith perceives something more, a certainty beneath the surface, a promise still unfolding. And as believers continue to walk within this assurance, their confidence does not rest on timing, but on the unchanging character of God. The same God who spoke creation into existence remains faithful to every word he has spoken. The rapture remains ahead, certain, purposeful, its nearness measured not by dates, but by readiness of the heart. And so the journey continues, faith pressing forward, hope holding steady, trust deepening with every step.
That steady trust reshapes how believers see the present world, not as something to escape, but as something temporary, a place where purpose is discovered, where faith is exercised, where love is practiced daily. The promise of what is coming does not pull believers away from responsibility, it anchors them within it, because knowing the future belongs to God changes how the present is lived. Fear loses its grip, urgency becomes focused, priorities become clear. What once seemed important begins to fade, what once felt small gains weight. Moments of kindness carry new meaning, acts of obedience feel purposeful. Even unseen faithfulness becomes significant. Scripture consistently ties hope to endurance, not because endurance earns reward, but because it reveals devotion. The glorified body is not granted to spectators, but to participants, those who walked with God, trusted Him, and remained aligned even when answers were incomplete. This alignment grows quietly, almost unnoticed. It does not announce itself loudly, it settles deeply. The heart learns to wait without frustration, to serve without recognition, to believe without constant reassurance. Faith becomes less reactive, more rooted. External chaos no longer dictates internal peace, because peace is anchored beyond circumstances. The promise of transformation shapes identity. Believers no longer see themselves only through earthly limitations. They see themselves as eternal beings in temporary form, moving toward completion. This perspective softens suffering without dismissing it. Grief still hurts, loss still matters, yet neither defines the end of the story. The rapture stands as a reminder that history is not random, that time is moving toward fulfillment. God is not responding to events, He is directing them. Every generation plays a role. Every season has purpose. Some plant, some water, others harvest, but God brings the increase. The glorified body represents the harvest of faith, not in isolation, but in community, a people gathered, restored, made whole. Scripture hints that this moment will be unmistakable, yet gentle, sudden, yet familiar, like coming home after a long journey, not because the destination is unknown, but because it has always been the goal. This understanding deepens devotion, not through pressure, but through assurance. Believers continue forward, walking faithfully, trusting fully, living between promise and fulfillment, between what has already been accomplished and what is soon to be revealed. With hearts steady, faith active, hope unwavering, as the unseen work of preparation continues, quietly shaping lives, strengthening resolve, aligning purpose, while God remains faithful, present, intentional, and completely committed to completing everything He has promised. That commitment becomes the quiet strength beneath daily life. It does not demand attention. It does not announce itself, yet it sustains everything. Faith settles into rhythm, not rushed, not stagnant, but steady. Believers learn that waiting is not inactivity, it is participation in trust. Trust that God is working even when nothing appears to change. Trust that growth is happening beneath the surface. Scripture often describes this season as walking, not running, not standing still. Walking implies direction,
progress, intentional movement. Each step may feel ordinary, but together they carry the soul toward fulfillment. The promise of transformation does not distract from the present, it dignifies it. Every choice becomes meaningful. Every act of faith becomes part of a larger design. The glorified body is not detached from the journey, it is shaped by it. The perseverance learned here becomes joy there. What was once resisted becomes embraced. What once required effort becomes natural. Scripture suggests that obedience will no longer feel costly, not because obedience loses value, but because desire is fully aligned with God's will. This alignment begins now, in small decisions, in unseen moments. The heart slowly learns what to release, what to hold loosely, and what to anchor firmly in God. As this happens, fear quietly fades, not suddenly, but gradually. The future no longer feels threatening because it is no longer unknown. Even without details, certainty rests in God's character. The rapture remains a promise, not a pressure. It is not used to frighten, but to encourage faithfulness. Scripture consistently points believers back to love. Love for God, love for others, because love is what endures. When knowledge fades, when speculation ends, the glorified body is clothed in this love, not as emotion, but as reality, a state where separation is gone, where communion is complete. Yet even now, this future shapes the present, guiding how believers speak, how they forgive, how they remain patient. Time continues, days pass, life unfolds, and within it all, this quiet assurance remains that nothing faithful is lost, nothing surrendered is wasted, nothing trusted in God is forgotten. The journey continues forward, marked not by urgency, but by purpose. As faith keeps walking, hope keeps breathing, and trust keeps deepening, while the promise stands
That
firm,
unfolding carries
unmoved,
a quiet
unchanging,
confidence with it.
waiting
Not
not as
confidence
uncertainty,
rooted in self,
but as
but
completion
confidence
drawing closer,
grounded in
steadily,
promise.
faithfully,
Believers
in
begin
perfect
to understand
alignment with
that faith
everything
is not
God has
fragile.
already spoken.
It does not collapse under questions. It does not weaken under waiting. Instead, it strengthens, layer by layer, season by season. The promise of glorification reframes identity. Life is no longer measured only by what is visible, but by what is being prepared. This awareness shifts motivation. Faith is no longer driven by fear of missing out, but by desire to remain close to God. Closeness becomes the goal, not outcomes, not timelines. Scripture consistently reveals that God values presence over performance. He seeks hearts that remain near, even when understanding is incomplete. That nearness shapes the soul. It calms restlessness. It steadies uncertainty. Believers learn to live without constant urgency, yet without complacency. They remain attentive, not because they are anxious, but because they are aligned. Alignment produces peace, a peace not dependent on circumstances, a peace that holds firm even as the world shifts. The glorified body stands as the ultimate confirmation of this peace, a reality where nothing is fractured, nothing is divided, spirit and body exist in harmony. Desire and obedience no longer conflict. This promise changes how believers view discipline. It is no longer burdensome, but formative. Prayer becomes communion, obedience becomes expression, trust becomes instinct. The rapture is not treated as an interruption to life, but as the fulfillment of a life lived toward God. The waiting itself becomes meaningful, not empty space, but sacred time. Scripture speaks of crowns, not as symbols of status, but as recognition of faithfulness.
faithfulness that often went unnoticed, uncelebrated, quiet, yet fully seen by God. This understanding reshapes perseverance. It becomes hopeful rather than exhausting. Even weariness carries purpose. Even longing has direction. The promise remains ahead, unannounced, certain, not dependent on human readiness alone, but on divine faithfulness. God remains consistent, unchanging in character, steady in intention. What he has spoken continues to stand, regardless of culture, regardless of time. Believers move forward with this assurance, not striving for certainty, but resting in trust, living lives shaped by eternity, yet fully present in the now. As the unseen work continues, quietly aligning hearts, refining motives, strengthening faith, and the story keeps moving forward, not rushed, not delayed, carried by the same promise that has guided every generation before. Still active, still alive, still drawing everything toward the moment when what has been prepared will be revealed exactly as God has intended.
That movement carries a sense of quiet purpose, not hurried, not forced, but intentional. Faith learns to trust the pace of God, even when it differs from human expectation. Scripture never portrays God as rushed, yet he is never late. Every moment unfolds with precision, even when it feels slow from within the waiting. This understanding softens impatience. It teaches the heart to remain steady, to remain faithful. The promise of glorification reminds believers that time is not being lost, it is being used to shape humility, to deepen dependence, to refine love. The soul grows familiar with surrender, not as loss, but as alignment. Letting go becomes easier, trust becomes stronger. What once felt uncertain begins to feel held, not because answers arrive, but because assurance does. The glorified body stands as the visible outcome of an invisible work, a work that begins with grace, continues through faith, and moves steadily toward completion. This perspective reshapes how believers endure difficulty. Challenges are no longer interruptions, they are part of formation. Even unanswered prayers carry purpose. Even silence shapes trust. Scripture shows again and again that God often works deepest when he appears quietest. Faith matures in these spaces, not through constant clarity, but through consistent trust. The rapture remains certain, yet it does not dominate daily life. Instead, it quietly informs it, guiding decisions, shaping priorities. Believers learn to live with open hands, holding blessings with gratitude, releasing control with peace. Hope settles deeper than emotion. It becomes conviction. A conviction that God is faithful, that his promises are secure, that completion is inevitable. The glorified body represents that certainty, a future where nothing is unresolved, nothing is fragmented. Until then, faith continues to walk, step by step, choosing love when bitterness tempts, choosing trust when fear rises, choosing obedience when ease is offered. Each choice aligns the heart more closely with what is coming. The journey remains active, not stagnant, not passive, as God continues his work, quietly preparing, faithfully shaping, while time moves forward, lives unfold, and hope remains anchored, steady, certain, unshaken. As the promise continues to draw everything closer, not with pressure, but with purpose,
leading onward, moment by moment, into what has been prepared, what has been promised, and what continues to unfold just beyond what can be seen.
That quiet unfolding begins to shape how believers understand meaning itself. Life no longer feels random. Moments no longer feel accidental. Even ordinary days begin to carry weight because eternity presses gently into the present. Scripture frames this life as stewardship, not ownership. Time, strength, relationships, all entrusted, all temporary. The promise of glorification teaches the heart how to hold these things wisely, not with fear of loss, but with gratitude and purpose. Believers learn that nothing offered to God is ever truly lost. What is surrendered here is preserved there. This awareness transforms motivation. Faith is no longer driven by reward, but by relationship. Obedience becomes response, not obligation. The heart grows quieter, less reactive, more discerning. Discernment sharpens not through urgency, but through alignment. The soul begins to recognize what pulls it closer to God and what slowly pulls it away. These distinctions become clearer over time, not through dramatic revelation, but through steady awareness. The promise of the glorified body strengthens this discernment, because what is destined for glory cannot remain divided. Compromise loses its appeal. Distraction loses its power. The heart longs for wholeness, for integrity, for unity. Scripture speaks of being transformed from glory to glory, not instantly, but progressively. Each season builds upon the last. Each step prepares the next. The rapture stands as the final unveiling of a transformation already in motion. Nothing sudden about the preparation, only the revelation. This truth steadies faith during delay. Waiting no longer feels empty, it feels intentional. Believers remain active within the waiting, loving deeply, serving faithfully, trusting consistently. The world may not recognize this quiet work, but heaven does. Scripture reminds that God sees in secret, that He remembers what others overlook. The glorified body confirms this remembrance, a testimony that nothing faithful was unseen. Every prayer carried weight, every sacrifice mattered, every act of trust was counted. This certainty does not inflate pride, it cultivates humility, because the work is God's, from beginning to completion. Faith rests not in achievement, but in grace. Grace that called, grace that sustains, grace that completes. The journey continues forward within this assurance, not striving, but trusting, not anxious, but attentive. As hearts remain open, lives remain aligned, and faith continues its steady walk, carried by promises that do not weaken with time, guided by a God who does not forget, and drawn ever closer toward what has been prepared, what has been promised, and what continues to take shape, just ahead of the present moment.
That forward movement slowly reshapes expectations. Believers stop measuring life only by outcomes and begin measuring it by faithfulness. Success is no longer defined by visibility, but by alignment. What matters most becomes what remains eternal. Character over comfort, truth over convenience. The promise of glorification brings clarity here because it reveals what truly lasts. Achievements fade, recognition disappears, but what is rooted in God remains. This realization deepens humility, not as self-denial, but as accurate perspective. the heart understands its place in a much larger story, one authored by God, not controlled by circumstance. Scripture often describes this life as preparation, not rehearsal, but formation. Every experience contributes. Every season shapes something within. Joy teaches gratitude. Suffering teaches endurance. Waiting teaches trust. None of it is accidental. None of it wasted. The glorified body stands as evidence that God values completion, that He restores fully, not partially. Redemption does not stop at forgiveness, it moves toward transformation. This truth changes how believers face weakness. Weakness is no longer shameful, it becomes the space where God's strength is revealed. Dependence deepens, pride loosens its grip. Faith becomes less about proving and more about abiding. Abiding produces fruit quietly, without force, without noise. The rapture remains ahead, certain yet unannounced, its presence felt not through fear, but through focus. Lives begin to reflect intentionality, choices align with conviction, desires refine over time. The heart grows sensitive to God's leading, responsive rather than resistant. Scripture's call to watchfulness feels less like warning and more like invitation, an invitation to remain awake, attentive, present, not distracted by excess, not dulled by routine. The promise of glorification keeps vision clear, reminding believers that the present form of life is not the final expression. This awareness fosters patience, a patience that does not rush God or doubt His timing. Trust matures here, not through answers, but through consistency. Day by day, faith continues to walk, holding hope without anxiety, living purposefully without pressure. As the unseen work of God progresses steadily, aligning hearts, strengthening resolve, deepening conviction, while time continues its course, lives unfold within grace, and the promise remains firm, drawing everything forward, not abruptly, but faithfully, as preparation continues quietly, and the story keeps unfolding, guided by the same unchanging God who began this work and continues to carry it forward.
That unfolding begins to influence how believers relate to one another. Community takes on deeper meaning, not as convenience, but as shared journey. Faith is no longer walked alone, it is carried together. Scripture often speaks of a body, many parts, one purpose. This image gains weight in light of glorification, because what is being prepared is not isolated, it is communal. Lives intertwined by faith, stories woven together by grace. The promise of transformation encourages patience with others. Grace becomes easier to extend because everyone is still becoming. Judgment softens, compassion deepens. Believers recognize that growth is not uniform. Some walk quickly, others slowly, yet all are moving forward under the same promise. This awareness reshapes conflict. Disagreement no longer threatens unity because unity is rooted beyond opinion. Love becomes the defining marker, not perfection. The glorified body represents this unity fulfilled, a state where division no longer exists, where misunderstanding fades. Until then, love practices what eternity will complete. Scripture emphasizes encouragement for this reason, because faith grows stronger when shared. Words spoken in season matter. Support offered quietly strengthens resolve. The journey toward transformation is sustained by these unseen exchanges. The rapture, then, is not merely personal hope. It is collective expectation, a gathering, a restoration, a completion experienced together. This shared anticipation does not create impatience, it fosters perseverance. Believers learn to lift one another when the waiting feels long, when faith feels heavy. The promise of glorification reframes service. Acts of kindness become investments, seeds planted for eternity. Nothing done in love is ever small. Nothing offered in faith is insignificant. This perspective steadies the heart during obscurity, when effort goes unnoticed, when faithfulness feels unseen. God's remembrance becomes enough. The glorified body stands as confirmation that heaven does not forget what earth overlooks. This truth keeps hope alive, even when progress feels slow. Time continues, seasons change, yet beneath it all, the same quiet work continues. Hearts being shaped, lives being aligned, faith being strengthened. As believers walk together, sharing burdens, sharing hope, trusting that the God who called them is still active, still faithful, still drawing everything forward toward what has been promised, what has been prepared, and what continues to take form just beyond the present moment.
That shared journey slowly reshapes how believers understand perseverance. Endurance is no longer seen as simply surviving, but as remaining faithful while becoming refined. Scripture consistently links perseverance to maturity, not as a test to pass, but as a process that forms depth. Faith deepens not when everything is clear, but when trust remains steady in uncertainty. The promise of glorification strengthens this resolve because it reminds believers that endurance has direction. Waiting is not endless, struggle is not permanent. Each season carries purpose, even those marked by silence. God's work is often most active when it appears least visible. Roots grow deeper underground long before fruit appears above. The glorified body represents the fruit of this hidden growth, a visible outcome of invisible faith. This awareness reshapes how believers respond to delay. Impatience gives way to trust. Frustration softens into surrender. The heart learns to rest without becoming passive, resting not in inactivity, but in confidence that God is faithful. Scripture encourages believers to stand firm, to remain rooted, not because the present is easy, but because the future is secure. The rapture remains ahead, certain yet unseen, its influence felt quietly in daily decisions, in how believers choose integrity, in how they resist compromise. This long view of faith brings stability. Storms no longer redefine direction. Even when circumstances shift, the foundation remains unchanged. The promise of glorification reminds believers that identity is not shaped by hardship, but by belonging to a God who finishes what he begins, who does not abandon halfway. This belonging nurtures courage, a courage that does not shout, but endures. Believers move forward with this steady confidence, not needing constant reassurance. Hope remains alive, not as emotion, but as conviction. The journey continues, faith unfolding day by day, as hearts remain open, lives remain aligned, and trust continues to deepen, while God's purpose advances quietly, carrying every promise forward, strengthening every willing heart, and continuing the work that leads steadily toward fulfillment, toward completion, toward what has been prepared and is still unfolding just beyond what can be seen.
That steady unfolding finally reaches its purpose, not abruptly, not dramatically, but exactly as it was always intended. Scripture reminds believers that God is both the author and the finisher. Nothing is left unfinished, nothing unresolved. What began in faith moves toward fulfillment in glory. The promise of glorification was never meant to distract from life. It was meant to define it. Every season, every trial, every moment of waiting finds its meaning here. The glorified body stands as God's declaration that redemption is complete, that restoration is total. Spirit, soul, and body brought into perfect harmony. No more division, no more weakness, no more longing unmet. What was once hoped for becomes reality. What was once unseen becomes visible. The rapture is revealed not as an escape, but as a homecoming, a moment where faith becomes sight, where trust is rewarded, where perseverance is crowned with fulfillment. Believers are not taken away from purpose, they are welcomed into completion. Everything endured finds its answer. Every promise spoken finds its fulfillment. The waiting ends not in loss, but in restoration. The journey of faith reaches its intended destination, not because of human effort, but because of divine faithfulness. God remains exactly who He has always been, faithful, unchanging, true to His word. What He began in grace, He completes in glory. And in that moment, there is no fear, no confusion, no regret. Only recognition, only peace, only fulfillment. The story does not end in uncertainty. It ends in assurance that every step mattered, every moment of faithfulness was seen, every act of trust was remembered. The promise stands fulfilled, the work stands complete, and God's people stand restored, whole, transformed, and fully alive in the reality they were always being prepared for.